2 Town Hall series, We Keep Us Safe. Tonight's program is basically two large panels comprised of leading organizers, activists, and elected officials in New York and California who address legislative and other reform priorities in this new year and legislative session. My name is Luis Hernandez, and I'm the National Director of Youth Campaigns and Leadership here at the Gathering for Justice. For those of you who don't know, the Gathering is now in our 15th anniversary year. We were founded by the legendary Harry Belafonte in 2005 after he saw a story on the news about a 5-year-old Black girl in Florida being handcuffed in her kindergarten class for throwing a tantrum. To address the realities of the criminalization of Black children, Mr. Belafonte brought together elders of the civil rights movement and youth from all across the country to form a covenant to end child incarceration and dismantle systemic racism in our justice system. And that's a model we use today to bring voices together, especially impacted voices, to build common agendas. We have an ambitious agenda for 2021, and I know that all of our guests on tonight's program do as well. So let's get this program started. I'm very, very excited to be moderating this first panel tonight, featuring a group of some of New York's most dedicated, intelligent, and powerful leaders in the areas across educational justice, criminal justice reform, racial justice, gun violence prevention, immigration justice, and so much more. And I'd love to introduce them. In segment one, we're graced to have Zakia Ansari, who's a parent organizer and the advocacy director for the New York Alliance for Quality Education, a leading statewide organization working on educational justice issues in New York. Zakia is the mother of 8 children and the grandparent of 3. She has spent 2 decades as a community organizer, fighting against educational justice and the oppression of Black and Brown people. In 2017, she was named City and State New York Magazine's 25 most influential people in Brooklyn, and we're proud to say that Zakia is a member of Justice NYC. Murad is a strategist, organizer, and advocacy expert, currently serving as the interim co-executive director at the New York Immigration Coalition. He's the son of Palestinian immigrants and has dedicated over 2 decades of his life fighting for low-income immigrants and communities of color across the state of New York. He currently serves as the trustee of the New York University Family Health Center Board and a member of Justice 2020 Committee as the commissioner of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission. Rodney is a lawyer and journalist by training and committed to creating a more just and compassionate world for all people, particularly those subject to the criminal legal system. Originally from Houston, Rodney is a graduate of Howard University and the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He's a member of the California State Bar and is a state director for criminal justice reform at forward.us, where he engages in state-level criminal justice policy in New York. And in his role, Rodney advances legislation to decarcerate jails and prisons across the state. We're also lucky to have with us Shaun King, who is a journalist and activist and the author of a recent bestseller, Make Change. Shaun was recently named by Time Magazine as one of the most of 25 most influential people in the world online. He is a co-founder of Real Justice, Action Pact, and is a pastor, teacher, motivational speaker in Atlanta's juvenile justice system, and recently launched the Grassroots Law Project. Shaun King is the CEO of a media platform, The North Star, as well as a popular news podcast, The Breakdown, and we have worked with Shaun over years, including my own brother's case, and count him as one of our close allies in this work. Stephanie Stevie Vargas is an activist organizer based out of Rochester, New York. In Rochester, she's organized for Black Lives. She's the co-founder of Free the People Rock, has worked to address police brutality throughout the city of Rochester, and as a member of NNLB, a collective of intergenerational, multidisciplinary, intersectional Black mages. She fights for Black liberation, direct reparations, abolition, and the decriminalization of poverty, while also working to dismantle anti-Blackness in the Latino community. She is currently the upstate campaign director for the Alliance for Quality Education and works to end systemic racism and economic oppression in New York State's public schools. We're also lucky to have with us Pamela Villa, the director of development at Bronx Connect, and a Bloomberg Public Health Fellow at Johns Hopkins. Pam focuses on fundraising, growth, and cross-functional initiatives that advance community-driven models of juvenile and criminal justice. Prior to joining Bronx Connect, Pam worked on the Closed Records campaign and spent 3 years in investment banking. We're also lucky to have with us our New York City public advocate, Jumaane Williams. He served on New York City Council representing the 45th District. Jumaane is a first-generation Brooklynite of Grenadine heritage. He graduated from the public school system, overcoming the difficulties of Tourette's and ADHD, to earn a master's degree from Brooklyn College. And the New York City Council, Jumani championed landmark legislation that fundamentally transformed policing in New York City. Jumani sponsored the Community Safety Act, reforming the city's police department by addressing the abuses of stop and question and frisk in communities of color and creating the NYPD's Office of Inspector General to investigate unlawful and unethical behavior. Welcome, everyone. How are you all? Really great, solid group. So glad to be with you all tonight. For those of you who are on this segment, turn your cameras on just so our audience can be able to see you. But really just wanted to dive right into sort of what we're here for, a conversation on the state of the people. I'm really wanting to address the realities that our people are facing, understanding that New Yorkers are already consumed with the violence of impoverishment, police brutality, economic enfranchisement, anti-Black racism, hunger, lack of access to clean air, water, adequate educational resources, job opportunities, and so much more, all while facing one of the deadliest pandemics of our lifetime. And while our governor's address in the 2021 agenda called for reimagination, rebuilding, and renewing, his vision doesn't quite meet the holistic needs of New Yorkers. There's a real opportunity to meet the moment, and that's where you all come into play. As experts in your respective fields, I'd love to hear from you all. What do New Yorkers need? What are the communities that you work with and serve? What are you hearing from them? And would love to kick it off with our public advocate. What are you hearing from New Yorkers? Sort of the advocate in chief of the city of New York. What do you think the state can do to meet the pressures of this moment?
Well, first, thank you, brother. It's always a pleasure to be in space with first all these folks, and then you as one of the young people leading here, man. I really appreciate that. Peace and blessings to everyone, love and light. I think people are at once scared. People are kind of trying to figure out what the next move is. All of the issues that you mentioned were kind of here before the pandemic. They've been exacerbated by the pandemic, including the failure of leadership. I gotta say, I know people following across the country, but finally the failed leadership of Andrew Cuomo is starting to come into more light now. I'll probably say that for another conversation, but it's highlighting a whole lot of things that we've been trying to address for a very long time. Just at a macro level, I always say I think the system had been working how it was designed to work, right? So I've never been like reform the system. I'm always like, we got to rip it up and put a new one down because I've said it before. If the quote unquote founding fathers woke up and spoke to us, they'd probably say, I'm not sure why was a Black person president. I'm not sure why there's a woman vice president. I'm not sure why women or Black people are voting, but otherwise you did a pretty good job of following through with what we put in place. And so what I see now is a great opportunity to not go back to normal because it didn't work for the vast majority of people, but to lay a whole new system down. But for that, you need to have political courage. And I'm not sure how much political courage is there. I think we're at a moment where we can kind of suss that out, but I don't know how much is actually there. And I know the Fred Hampton Jr. movie is coming out soon, Jesus and the Black Messiah. I can't wait to see it. And I know people are going to be quoting him when that movie comes out. But one of the things he said is, the answer to capitalism is not Black capitalism. And I think we should talk about that a little. And I paraphrase that because I think the answer to traditional and establishment politics is not necessarily traditional and establishment Black politics. And so it's not just putting folks in there that look like you, as folks who want to rip up the system and put a new one down. And that's, people will say they want to, and then not necessarily do it. The other challenge is we're not the only country that has dealt with this inequity. We're not the only country that's dealt with issues of genocide, of the horrors of enslavement and things of that nature. We're like the one country that refuses to have an honest conversation about it. So whenever we get close to having a conversation, you get a white supremacist insurrection in the Capitol. Like stuff like that is what the response is. Even after Reconstruction, when we started, Black folk getting elected, you had the Ku Klux Klan. You get, discussions like Barack Obama was there, and You get MAGA and Trump. So the system itself doesn't seem to want to really have that conversation because it's rooted in its continuance. And we have to start from that position so that we can really have an honest discussion about what it is we have to lay out and make sure that we have the right people in there. I think we can do it. And then for the folks sometimes who are nervous, I always say, you don't have to necessarily be a racist or a bigot yourself or Islamophobe or homophobe or transphobic to continue systems that are rooted in it. You actually might be a racist or homophobe or bigot, like all those things, but you don't have to be one to continue it forward. Like we all have to have the ability to say, I didn't create the system that I was born into, but how am I going to help put a new one in for the next generation? And I think that's a space that we can grab if we have the courage to grab it. But it does mean that some people who are used to power and used to a system that helps my friends but doesn't help everyone else, we have to put people in who are willing to uproot that. That was a long answer. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying that was a long answer to your question. I don't know if you wanted that long.
You're good. I'd say quickly. I watched Judas and the Black Messiah. It was an incredible film. I mean, can't wait for you all to watch it. I got an advance from the producer, so I watched it. It's
I just dropped that. All right.
But really, I think something you touched base on that I'd love to pull other folks in is what public safety looks like. You started off your response with saying the people of New York are scared, and I think that's a reality that we have to face, whether or not we feel comfortable saying that vulnerability is what allowed us to change so many of the systems that we've broken through. And so I'd love to pull in Stevie. Stevie, what do you think we have to do to actually redefine public safety in a way that makes New Yorkers feel comfortable and safe and supported in their state?
First and foremost, we need to start listening to the Black and Brown community and having true, honest conversations with the Black and Brown community. I think a lot of these conversations have been either behind the scenes or not true attempts at dialogue to address the needs of the community. We are calling for divestment of our police forces and an investment in critical resources, housing, resources for mental health services, resources for those suffering with substance abuse disorders. When you look at what cops are being called for, they're being called to enforce evictions. They're being called to address mental health crises. They're being called for instances of poverty. They are not equipped to handle those things. They are there to punish. And that's not what brings about true community safety. Our communities should not have a budget that is bigger for our police while we're cutting youth services, while we're cutting funding for education, we're cutting funding for mental health services, things that bring about true safety in our community. And Black and Brown people are screaming for these resources. And they're always saying we don't have the funds, but they always have the funds for a bigger police budget. And here in Rochester, it's like, well, what are the police using this money for? We found out during the uprisings over the summer. They got drones, they got pepper bullets, they got tear gas, they got flashbangs. They are heavily militarized. That's where that money is going. Well, we're cutting services for youth. We are investing in the school to prison pipeline. We are investing in criminalization. We are investing in mass incarceration. How does that bring about true public safety? And our communities are heavily triggered whenever we see a cop. We don't associate cops with safety. We associate cops with violence, harm, and punishment. So even when a cop is answering to enforce an eviction and trying to assess the situation between a landlord and the renter, it's already escalating off bat because you see a man in uniform and you know you're going to be harmed. And even here in Rochester, we were marching all summer against police brutality, and we had no idea that we lost someone in our own community, Daniel Prude. And more recently, we had an incident where a cop handcuffed and maced a 9-year-old child in the face. And I'll highlight that a lot of those people who stormed our Capitol were treated with a lot more care than this 9-year-old Black girl in the city. And this cop told this Black girl, "You're acting like a child." And she replied, "I am a child." That is not what our community needs. And now we have electeds in Rochester who are willing to put pen to paper, which is what we need. And we need to support what they're doing. And we also need to take it a step further.
Absolutely.
So thank you to Samra Brook and Damon Meeks who proposed legislation to ban the use of pepper spray on youth under the age of 18. Let's take it a step further. How about our cops not engage with our youth? How about we cap that? So there's a lot of conversations to be had, but we also need to see action. And we're calling for the divestment of our police force because they are not keeping our community safer. Trainings is not going to help them understand the systemic inequities in our community because they will always see us as other.
Absolutely. And you brought up some amazing points around the ways, the realities that young people are facing, both in schools, but outside of schools. I know that recently Rochester passed legislation to remove police from schools, but even then we see young Black girls being harmed outside of their schools. And so it really forces a question around, is it policing in schools or is it policing in general, right? Are we just removing police from our educational institutions or are we removing them from our communities as a whole? But I'd love to bring in Zakia to talk about the circumstances that young people are facing right now. I know that the realities of parents, teachers, and students alike are difficult right now in an age where there's hybrid learning, there's remote learning, everything is constantly changing. There aren't enough resources for young folks specifically. What are you hearing from students and parents alike, and what can we be doing right now to address that?
Yeah, there's so much to be done. Thank you for having me. Love the gathering, love Justice League, love Lewis, and this amazing panel. So, I mean, first of all, what we know is that children have been suffering over the last year, but they've been suffering for a couple of decades as well. It's just been highlighted during this pandemic. We have thousands of children that still don't have technology and working computers. They don't have reliable Wi-Fi across New York State. And we had a better plan for opening businesses than we did for schools. So that says a lot about the lack of courage that Jumaane talked about we need the state to have and what they've been willing to do. And what we need them to do in this moment as children are hurting, so are parents and so are educators. There's a lot of loss, there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of healing that needs to take place. Is we need New York State to protect students, not billionaires. We need them to invest in our New York. We have invested in our New York campaign. That's 6 bills that if we had the courage, the political courage to stop building budgets off the backs of Black, brown, and poor people and children, then we would put forth this agenda that could raise up to $50 billion. Why is that needed? The reason we have to ask that question is ridiculous because we have so many stories that we've heard rather in the press and other areas of parents, students, and educators' stories of what's happening and what they need. Clean HVAC systems, Wi-Fi and technology, culturally responsive education. And at the same time, as we're fighting for these things, we have, a governor in this moment right now who instead of investing in schools in his executive budget, decided to pretty much hijack some of our federal dollars. Right. And so while we are getting this historic amount of money, almost $2 billion, the reality is the only reason we're getting those dollars is because of the federal government. Because in the governor's executive budget, he put $0 from New York State. I want to say it again, $0 from New York State. Right. And we know what that looked like last time when that happened. That was $1 billion cut to New York City public schools. So I say all that because I think that narrative needs to be shared because we have this love affair with Governor Cuomo, and that's all good. He might look good in the suit. I don't know what the name brand he wears, but his 10-year legacy as it pertains to education has exacerbated educational racism in this state. And that's a fact, right? And so we just need folks to understand that there are children hurting now. There are educators and their families that need to get back to work. And the fact that we have a governor that had a better plan for how to open businesses and not one on how we are going to open up schools safely for children, families, and educators, I think that says a lot. And especially in this moment that he is not willing to invest $0 from the state budget into education says even more. And so what we hope is that the New York State Legislature, the Assembly and the Senate will say, we're not feeling that. We're going to raise revenue and we're going to invest in our children for once and for all.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Zakia. And really, I appreciate your lens that you always bring to this conversation around educational justice. I think the sort of practice and what we need to be working towards is exactly that, centering young people, centering what young folks need both inside and outside of their schools. And some of what came up earlier was really the circumstances that young people are facing overall. This past summer, one of the first programs that our mayor here in New York City aimed to cut was SYP, one of the main sort of sources of income and a safety net for young people. We know that when young people aren't safe, when young people don't have the resources that they need, that leads to violence, incarceration, and so much more. So I want to bring in Pamela, who I know works with young people, particularly systems impacted young people in the Bronx and many other areas around New York City. What are young people needing right now? What are you hearing from young folks, both incarcerated and recently released? And in what ways can the state be supporting some of that reentry and really engagement of young people who need services now more than ever?
Thank you so much, Luis, and thanks for having me here tonight. At Bronx Connect, we are all about community-driven solutions, and so I love the name of this event. We keep us safe. I think in many ways, New York City has done some really wonderful stuff because communities have been, at the forefront of asking for resources to do the work themselves, right? To put into implementation, cure violence efforts where impacted people get to keep the community safe and get to use their power in the community to influence public safety. And so at Bronx Connect, we have various programs that work with young people, starting from prevention, violence prevention, all the way to alternatives to incarceration for young people who have already committed violent felonies and who are dealing with a lot of trauma, right? I think at the end of the day, when we think about racial justice in New York City, we have to think, and youth justice really, because they're really connected in so many ways. Black and brown children in New York City just need support. They need investment. A lot of the themes that other panelists have touched on are super important. And they need jobs. It's education is important, but they also need opportunities. Like when the internships were cut last summer, summer youth employment, that is something that is can be life-changing to kids. And we're often hearing young people talk about how much that helps them, and it's not just about getting a paycheck, even though that certainly helps them. It's also about the experience they're getting, the exposure, the structured time that they're spending, learning, basic life skills at, various organizations throughout New York City. So to even think about the fact that we really haven't cut the police budget very much, and yet we're making all these cuts to youth services, is during a pandemic when these communities are already being hard hit with higher hospitalization rates and with so many other compounding problems around income loss and employment, that's just unconscionable. We have to think about they're really our future. Young people independently have, rights, and we should protect them. But also we really want to have a wonderful, vibrant city years from now. We need to invest in our young people. So we just have to be smart about it and think long term.
Absolutely. And some of what the gathering has been involved in, obviously through the pandemic, but even before, is really what does decarceration look like as the goal, right? As the end goal? What is sort of eliminating child incarceration as a whole look like, not only for New York State, but around the country? And so when we talk about sort of the needs of young people and the ways in which crime is in an uptick, but also resources are in a downfall, and the ways in which those things are so interconnected, it presents itself a conversation about what young people are facing behind the confines of jails and prisons across the state, but what everyone's facing, what are New Yorkers facing. And so I want to bring in Rodney to address sort of the circumstances behind cells across the city and the state. We know that people are facing COVID-19, and the response from the state as a whole has not been holistic, has not addressed the needs of people. We know that they're one of really the most vulnerable populations right now, facing this deadly pandemic with extremely limited resources. And we have a real opportunity to again, meet the moment. What does it look like to let these people out, if they're in there for nonviolent crimes, if they're in there for things that they won't be in there for more than a year from now? But really would love to hear from you, Rodney.
Absolutely. I think starting out, it's first just incredibly important that we acknowledge yet another person who died in a New York State prison today. This is the 31st person who's died due to COVID-19 in one of these facilities, another preventable death, another life lost, and a family that is now grieving the loss of someone who has been essentially sentenced to death by incarceration. And unsurprisingly, of the 31 people who have died behind bars in New York State prisons because of COVID, most of these folks have been people of color. And since the start of this pandemic, upwards of 5,000 people in New York State prisons have contracted this virus. And crazy enough, about 60% of these cases have happened in the last 2 months. So we're seeing a crisis that is just rippling and just, growing and is so out of control. And unfortunately, so little has been done to adequately address it. To date, about 15% of people in New York State's prisons have contracted the virus. That far outpaces the rate at which it's spreading on the outside. And it's a problem that we're going to be grappling with for years and years to come. We, of course, saw similar patterns in the state's jails where hundreds of people have contracted this virus. We've seen numerous deaths, and the spreads continue to this day. I don't think it's surprising to anyone that this is spiraling out of control in the way that it is, but it's something that many people have been calling for or calling out for quite some time. And unfortunately, the state, as well as many other states across the country, have done far too little to address it. As I stated, jails and prisons have been hotbeds. People are 4 to 5 times more likely to contract this virus behind bars. And this has been the case since the start of this pandemic. This is a public health crisis that frankly met another public health crisis, and that is incarceration. That has always been a place in which, public health has been a huge concern, where adequate access to healthcare has been frankly non-existent. And it's presented to us with a problem that is, forever going to impact families and communities across the state of New York. So, of course, from the start of this pandemic, advocates, formerly incarcerated folks have, obviously been advocating for release of people, as many people as possible, particularly older folks, immunocompromised folks, and in some cases, pregnant women who have been incarcerated in the state's jails and prisons. And unfortunately, the response from the state has been woefully inadequate. Far too many people who have pre-existing conditions were left, inside these facilities and are, suffering the consequences at this very moment. Coupled with, this spread that has just, run through prisons and jails across the state, is rollbacks to the 2019 bail reform laws that were extraordinarily promising, that significantly reduce the state's jail population. But, as with many things, as soon as these reforms passed, then came the vitriol. Lawmakers across the state, many Republicans, law enforcement and the like, mainly people who are opponents of reform, came out with their vitriol, with their anti-Black rhetoric, with their lies, which we have seen, plastered across the headlines of so many papers across the state of New York. And those lies were unfortunately persuasive. And, now we are seeing an uptick in the state's jail population because the state legislature and the governor rolled back those reforms last year in the state budget. So, coupled with, limited opportunities for release via parole, as last year there were fewer parole releases than in the year past in 2019. So, we just really saw the convergence of a lot of disasters, and, this is what we're now grappling with. And so, folks have seen the articles, they've seen the headlines, we've seen hundreds of them come down in New York, but unfortunately, enough has just not been done to adequately address this crisis that is just, again, spiraling out of control with far too little being done to address it. Now, one, I think, promising piece of news that we received today is that folks who are 65 and older and incarcerated in the state of New York are now qualifying for vaccines. But this unfortunately had to come after defender associations and advocates filed a lawsuit. It was prompted by litigation. This was not a response by the state. This was literally because advocates had to yell and scream that folks were not getting access to this life-saving vaccine And we're talking about people who are in congregate settings, by the way, and people in other congregate settings across the state, from nursing homes to group homes and the like. They've had access to this. They were part of 1B of the vaccine distribution, but incarcerated people were left behind, and that is again, woefully unacceptable. And it's something that we have to actively fight back against. And so I know we, have opportunities in this coming session, which I think I'm, very excited about, to really try and change course on this, because, this is not something that we can see sustained. I mean, prisons and jails were very dangerous. They were deadly before this pandemic. And this pandemic has frankly just made that all the more evident. So, voters this past year presented New York lawmakers with a mandate. They told them to go bold on criminal justice reform. The state Senate Democrats have now gained a supermajority. There's a supermajority in the Assembly. So there's really an opportunity to move along some really, really transformative legislation that will liberate so many people across this state. And, I know so many people like to invoke the names of Kalief Browder and Layleen Polanco and the like. And if we're to honor those lives, if we are to really uplift those lives and to say that Black Lives Matter, well, then we also have to be thinking about our brothers and sisters behind bars. And I think that's so critical. I'm glad that vaccines are now slowly coming into these facilities, but I mean, obviously that needs to, be ramped up. And it's, something that we're going to keep holding the line on. And, so many important reforms are coming down the pipeline.
Thank you, Rodney. I really, really appreciate that. I think you mentioned so much, but a couple of things I'd love to follow back on is, one, you mentioned the ways in which all of this starts with legal issues, right? Which we all know that district attorneys hold power of in different parts around the country. But that other piece you mentioned around the way in which media has controlled the narrative so much so that it's led to shifts in policy, it's led to the rollback in bail reform, it's led to the lack of action that we've seen this past year to address COVID-19 behind prisons, jails, and facilities. I'd love to hear from you, Sean. What can we be doing right now to elect district attorneys that are going to fight against these issues? I think when we hit things at its core, when we talk about addressing root causes, it really starts with those who are perpetuating the harm, folks who are still incarcerating, convicting, sending folks to jails, prisons, and detention centers across the country, even when they're not sentenced to death, right? And when we know that COVID-19 is so rampant that it's literally a death sentence for many. As Rodney started, we see another death here in New York today, but that's happening, and that's a pattern across the country. So Sean, would love to hear from you. What can we be doing to truly ride on that progression and pushing DAs to do more, but also to control our own narrative? As someone who sort of runs your own media platform and understands the ways in which media can control narratives and cause damage, would love your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you, Luis, and thank you, Rodney. You were brilliant just now, Rodney, and thank you for all your insight, and thank you to all the panelists and leaders and people who are watching across New York State and across the country. I try to teach people, Luis, that there's arguably no single person more powerful in this system that we call the justice system or the criminal legal system than your local district attorney. Almost 95% of all criminal cases go across their desk. Now, we often say that there are about 2.5 million people incarcerated in this country, but over the course of any given year, there are about 10 million people who are incarcerated across the year. And again, nearly 95% of those cases go across the desk through the offices of our local district attorneys. I recently saw a scorecard system that rated America's district attorneys on progressive issues, including bail, including issues of cannabis and marijuana and war on drugs. There was not a single district attorney in New York City in the top 40 district attorneys, and there were hardly any district attorneys from New York State in the top 100 on most of the issues. We have really bad district attorneys across New York City and New York State. And what's disturbing is that we often hardly show up even for district attorneys' races for the primaries. I live in Brooklyn. DA Gonzalez has actually surprised me and has really tried to rise to the occasion, but his race is a really great illustration When he was elected in Brooklyn, less than 2% of all eligible voters in Brooklyn showed up to vote. And now he's running for reelection. And I say this even frankly as somebody who interacts with DA Gonzalez. I would still, if I was giving DAs A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's, he's a C. And he's running unopposed right now. And so as we talk about what we can do to transform these systems from the inside out, that position is so incredibly powerful. We have an opportunity to do better in Manhattan. There's a Manhattan DA's race that's coming up in just a few months. But let me tell a quick story, Luis. I campaigned for months for the new district attorney in San Francisco, Chesa Boudin. And he's a brilliant, compassionate, kind soul. He grew up with both of his parents incarcerated. His father is still incarcerated, ironically incarcerated in New York State. And when I campaigned with Chesa, he said something that I actually thought he couldn't do. He would often say at his campaign events that we want to reduce the number of people incarcerated in San Francisco by 50% at the end of 4 years. And when he would say that, I just thought it was, and here, this is me as an optimistic person, I didn't know that it was possible because nobody had ever reduced their incarceration rate by 50% in 4 years. And I thought maybe it would take him 8 years or a couple of terms. Chesa Boudin, as district attorney of San Francisco, reduced the incarceration rate by 50% in about 7 months. And that's the power of a district attorney. He decriminalized about 200 different issues, including sex work, including most drug crimes, including things that we think of as crimes of poverty, crimes of mental health. He decriminalized behaviors across the board that need treatment, that need compassion, that need love, attention, care. And in doing so, actually made San Francisco safer by many different metrics. He's being attacked for it. We can do that across New York City, across all of our boroughs. We need to do that, as Stevie talked about, in Rochester, in upstate New York, all across the state. But those local DAs have so much power. At Real Justice, we've now helped to elect 25 district attorneys across the country, including in Boston and Philadelphia, in San Antonio and Austin. But we've yet to elect a single district attorney in all of New York State, and including all of our boroughs. And we're going to give it our very best shot in Manhattan. And we hope that we can be the model for how you change the justice system in a single borough or a single city, that we can be the model for the rest of the boroughs and for the rest of the cities across the country. There's a lot we can do. And I think, Luis, I'll close with this. Part of what frustrates me, and I think most of us who are watching share this frustration, is that our city, New York, our state, New York, we're completely controlled by Democrats. And most states, I'm from the South. I was born and raised in Kentucky, and I lived in Georgia for 20 years. Those states don't have Democratic control. And it's what they're fighting for. None of those states have Democratic legislatures like we do, Democratic houses or senates and assemblies. Most cities in those places don't even have Democratic control. Well, we have it. And so what we're talking about now is, do we have the will, the political will, the courage to do what's right? And all of the panelists today have spoken of brilliant pieces of legislation that are waiting, of policies that are there for us. We just have to have the political courage to do it. And we have to organize in a way that lets all of our current elected officials know that we voted them into this power with the expectation that they would bring about deep systemic change, and they need to rise to this occasion. I'm still hopeful. I'm hopefully frustrated, Luis. I'm hopeful and frustrated. And I think we can be both at the same time. And let's just keep on pushing. Love and appreciate all of you who are here. Let's keep working in smart coalitions and fight for change the best we can.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. And really wanted to sort of create some time and space as well to address the seriousness and the realities that we're still facing. But undocumented communities are facing even more. Folks who have limited access and resources aren't receiving the stimulus check, don't qualify for unemployment benefits and so many other things. Murad, as an expert in this field, working with immigrant families across the state of New York, I'd love to hear from you. What has the COVID response been? Has it or has it not been adequate? And really anything you can share around the state of how immigrant communities are doing.
Thanks, Louis, and thanks for organizing this great panel, and thanks to all the other panelists for making the time to be on here tonight on a Thursday night. I think we're living through a really interesting time. We have folks who apparently have never known these are the issues that low-income communities and communities of color have been facing for a long time. Health inequity, education inequity, injustice in the criminal justice system that we are all constantly seeing. And I think COVID added another layer to it that had you not seen it before, and let's say that you were blinded to it, right? Like you kept saying, I don't see it. I think COVID really opened up a ton of people's eyes, but what have they done to actually change the inequity and the injustice that our communities are constantly facing? To be quite frank with you, not much. We always say that the city and the state's budget is a values document, and how they invest in the budget, it demonstrates the state and the city's values. And what ended up happening was that the survival services at every level were cut. In the city, we saw drastic cuts through every agency that actually did services directly to communities and who funded organizations to do services directly to communities. So because of COVID and because of the revenue shortfalls, instead of actually thinking about ways to raise revenue, austerity happened. And that's going to continue to happen unless that there is a real effort right now, which, Invest in Our New York is really pushing to get the 6 bills passed. You mentioned that undocumented folks and people with certain statuses have been left out of every single stimulus package, and that is absolutely true. We fought like hell for the past 8 to 9 months to ensure in the last stimulus that the mixed status families would be eligible for stimulus checks. We also fought for I-10 holders, children who are U.S. citizens to get stimulus checks. And slowly but surely, we're seeing the fruits of that labor, but we're also seeing attacks on our work. Just today in the Senate, there was a bill where 8 Democrats voted with Republicans to ensure that undocumented people cannot receive direct cash payments from the government. Guess what? They weren't getting it from the beginning. So this is going to be a parade of, to be quite frank with you, inconsistency from both parties. So you can't say you're the lesser of the two evils. You can't say that you are doing what you can. From the federal government down to the local government, they all need to step up. We're talking about investing in our communities, really investing, creating an excluded worker fund for people who are in the cash economy, the gig economy, regardless of their immigration status, who should be getting support during any natural disaster or if they lose their job. And there's a bill that's currently moving right now to do just that. It's part of the 6 bills that we're all advocating for to increase revenue within the state. And at the city level, I think everyone is just waiting to see what the federal government is going to do and what bailout they're going to get. And to be quite frank with you, we're in a place where we need to really fight like hell, because communities of color have always been faced with injustice and inequity. And those without status face it even worse because they are at a point where, they're not eligible for a number of benefits. So the New York Immigration Coalition has been fighting for our communities for the past 34 years. And we've had some real significant wins over the past 2 years here in the state of New York. But we have to go further. We can't just catch up from the past 30 years. We need to actually go ahead and pave a path for the future to make sure that communities are thriving and not just surviving. And that is the problem that we see in New York consistently, where we are getting the bare minimum. And instead of getting what communities actually need, which is investment, we're getting austerity. which only makes our communities go even further back. This isn't a Democrat or a Republican issue. This is a people issue. And the people are the ones who have the power. So when it comes down to it, the people just need to be able to understand that you elect these people who are divesting from your schools. Point blank. You are electing these people who are divesting from your food pantry. You are electing these people to represent you in your best interest. And this is the moment where we really all have to rally together. I've never seen devastation this bad. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we are living through some really, really hard times right now. You know, organizations that have never done food distribution or food pantries are now food pantries and food distribution centers. Our communities are all hurting. Our kids who are going to public school, as Zakia said, many of them don't have devices to actually do at-home learning. So what are we going to do? How are we going to get our kids up to speed in their educational process if they've been left out? So we have a lot of work to do. And I think that as the time continues to pass by, as the state is waiting for the federal government to take action, the city is waiting for the federal government to take action, guess what? The people who were most vulnerable and most marginalized from before COVID are even more vulnerable now, even more marginalized. And now we're talking about the communities that were most hit hardest by COVID, and they're not able to purchase, health insurance off the exchange. And New York State, for folks who don't know, has a exchange where you can go and purchase affordable health insurance. Undocumented folks can't do that. We've been fighting that campaign for many years. We have a bill that we're moving forward this year to try to get folks to be able to do that. But if you look at the communities that were most hurt, it's Black and brown communities that were most hurt by COVID, who died at a higher rate than any other community. And now, as we're talking about the vaccine and its rollout, you know, just for transparency, I am a member of the New York State Vaccine Equity Task Force. And we've been advocating for more people to be included in the early onset. If they were considered essential during the lockdown, they should be considered essential to getting the vaccine first. So making sure that delivery workers, restaurant workers, grocery store workers, cab drivers, everyone who is mandated to work should be getting the vaccine first, because guess what? They still need to work because they don't have the luxury of being able to stay at home and working from home, to be quite frank. So we're fighting the fight. And I think in this moment, we really have to have this honest conversation, not just with ourselves, but with our community. If this wasn't a wake-up call, there's going to be a massive election this coming year in New York City for mayor, comptroller. The mayor and comptroller are up there. Everyone's term limited out. Council is going to have a huge turnover. Get to know your council candidates. Understand what their budget priorities are going to be. Ask them, what are they going to invest in their communities with the money that they get from the council? Ask the mayoral candidates, what are they going to do to invest in their communities? How are they going to reform the NYPD? How are they going to ensure that immigrants can thrive in the city? So that this isn't a one-way conversation where you're being spoken at, but you're speaking back and you're raising your voice and speaking up for you and your community.
Thank you, Murad, and I appreciate you bringing in those solutions. I think that's sort of what I want the rest of the panelists to have an opportunity to frame their responses to. Really, what can we do as New Yorkers to create a sense of urgency for these issues and causes? And you touched on something so important, the ways in which organizations across the state, but really across the country, have been forced into doing direct service, even if that's not our work. Here at The Gathering, we launched a community relief fund where we've really given out over $30,000 at this point to systems impacted young people. And we're not an organization that typically does direct service, but understanding the sort of circumstances and what young people are facing, but what incarcerated communities are facing and so many other systems impacted folks are facing, that's our responsibility. And so I appreciate you bringing all that into this space, Murad. Would love to hear from others. What are your legislative priorities? What can New Yorkers do to create a sense of urgency around your cause? And in many ways, what can we do to advance justice this year? And I'd pass it to Stevie to kick us off.
Yeah, so right now, especially in Rochester, we are really making a big push that we support legislation that invests in mental health supports and invests in mental health resources, making sure that police are no longer the ones who are responding to mental health crises. We need to decriminalize mental health issues in our state, because especially for Black and Brown people, being Black and Brown and having a mental health issue is oftentimes a death sentence. And we want our legislators to work to remove that harm. And so we are going to prioritize decriminalizing mental health in our community, and really push for our legislators to draft, write, introduce legislation that really puts mental health at the forefront, so that we can eliminate the harm that police cause in our community. And as an aside, we are also calling for reparations. Our communities need reparations, and reparations are to repair harm. Like you said, a lot of us have had to delve into mutual aid and direct service because our communities need it. And that is how we are going to make our community safe, by making sure that money is getting into the hands of those who need it. And that's typically Black and Brown families. So that's what we're going to be pushing our electeds to do and to prioritize, especially when it comes to mental health of our Black and Brown communities and mental health of our youth.
Thank you, Stevie. You put that so spot on, and I'll quickly uplift, because I know if my sister Karis was on here, she would press on that as well. It can't be an aside. I think descendants of enslaved Africans, particularly during Black History Month, we need to be talking about reparations. We need to be talking about what that looks like. It needs to be a priority across the state of New York, but across the country as a whole. But would love to hear from Zakia. Zakia, what are we seeing in educational justice? What are the solutions, and what are some of the policy priorities that you all are fighting for in this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to continue to fight for it. There is a revenue. We are in a deficit in this state. That is very true. We can get ourselves out of this. We need to, once again, protect students, not billionaires, and raise revenue. We can't get out of this without raising revenue, and we can't continue to cut and build budgets on the backs of Black and Brown children. The parents that we fight with and fight for understand that their children are descendants of kings, queens, tribal chiefs, and warriors. They speak English, they're monolingual speakers, they are LGBTQIA, they are gender nonconforming, they are all gifted, and they all deserve a better education than what New York State is offering them right now. So we're fighting hard, and I'm going to encourage other folks to join us. We have a few weeks left of this budget. It's not over yet. And so you have a state assembly member, you have a state senator, call them and say, support the Invest in Our New York Act. We need to raise revenue, and our children deserve us to fight as hard as we can for them.
Thank you, Z. Would love to bring in Pamela. Pamela, what are you sort of hearing and sensing around at Bronx Connect, and overall with young folks who are systems impacted? What can New Yorkers in general do to create that sense of urgency, and what are some of the solutions that we're fighting for this year?
Thank you. So one of the things that we're really excited to be working on this year is the Right to Remain Silent campaign, which, if you're not familiar with this, currently cops have a free pass to question kids and adolescents when they get taken into custody, which is insane that, it's been 32 years since the Central Park Five, are now known as the Exonerated Five, were basically convicted of a crime they didn't commit because cops basically manipulated them, and they were 14 years old at the time. And nothing has been done to prevent that in the last 32 years. And so the Right to Remain Silent really wants to lift that up and push New York State to require that children speak to a lawyer before they're interrogated by police. And so, why does that matter? Obviously, if you're on this panel, there's so many reasons why, this matters. It's really about racial justice, because it's not like white kids from the Upper West Side are getting picked up and getting taken in to get interrogated by police. It's really the kids from Bronx Connect that are walking home from school or walking home from program that may get picked up for no good reason, and are then interrogated without having the opportunity to really realize what waiving your right to remain silent really means. Because kids, study after study, have shown that kids just don't have the same reasoning capacity and long-term thinking capacity that adults do. They just think differently. So 90% of kids waive their right to remain silent. And so this is an issue that really, I mean, we're 32 years late, but we have to act on it. You know, the time is really past due to do something about this issue. And it's something that really disproportionately impacts Black and brown kids. And it's something that disproportionately impacts kids. Adults are less likely to falsely confess to a crime they didn't commit. And so it's something that Bronx Connect is really excited about. Our young people are actually leading the charge and are involved in the campaign. We also have a coalition of over 60 organizations. So if you're a part of an organization, you want to get involved, I think there should be in the Facebook Live some more information, a link for you to get involved in that. California recently, I know we're going to be hearing from the California folks soon. California passed a similar law last year. And then this year, Washington and Maryland are looking at similar bills. So I feel like this is the time for New York to act. If we don't act on it now, then we're going to be behind the ball in terms of, looking at the national landscape. So there really is no excuse to look at this. And then there's also one other campaign that I want to quickly highlight before we move on. And that is pushing the mayor before he leaves to come through on his promise to close Rikers and to continue to reduce the population, which has been trickling up since COVID started, and to divest from DOC and divest from these systems that we've referenced throughout the night. There's multiple opportunities for the mayor to do something on this before he leaves, and to really release more people, to call on judges and prosecutors to release people that are in jail that really should not be in jail. And so there's a sign-on letter link that you can take a look at in the Facebook chat or whatever it is. Check it out. And New York City, I think, is in a really pivotal place right now in terms of stepping up and showing what a wonderful, way forward is in terms of correcting all the wrongs and injustices that have plagued us as a country. And so if we don't take this unique opportunity to move forward on racial justice, then I think we're really gonna look back and regret it. So check those opportunities out. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Pamela. And I'd quickly as well uplift that we're also working collectively on another legislative agenda that goes hand in hand with the Right to Remain Silent campaign around ending deceit as well. I think, as Murad said, we can't just play catch up. We need to start thinking forward. And so what does it look like to actually end the practice of police officers being able to lie during interrogations as a whole? And so know that the Innocence Project and many of our other coalition partners are working on that. That's another sort of priority. But I'd love to close this out with Rodney. Rodney, can you share with us what is the plan to decarcerate? What does parole and probation reform look like this year? And what are sort of the other legislative priorities that will really bring New York to not only to play catch up, but to progress in meaningful ways?
Right. I mean, one, building on Pamela's point earlier, I mean, the population at Rikers Island and jails across the state are increasing because of bail reform rollback. So first and foremost, think that lawmakers should really, really go back to the table on bail reform and be frank about the reasons why it was rolled back in the first place. I mean, it's abundantly clear that it was driven by vitriolic and false rhetoric. And that's something that we can't allow to lead our policies. We can't allow lies and fear and racism to fuel rollbacks to reforms that are largely helping marginalized people, Black people, brown people, and so many other marginalized groups. I mean, otherwise, you of course run the risk of seeing the pretrial jail numbers far outpace what that number was before the reforms even went into effect. So, this is something that I think needs to urgently be looked at because these numbers are growing very scarily and, obviously need to be addressed. As for parole reform, I mean, parole has always been a mechanism for release that has proven time and again that it needs to be reformed. Far too many people are being denied parole based solely on their conviction, and not based on who they have become, the rehabilitation that they have gone through, the programming that they've done, the education that they have acquired. And this, is unfortunately fueling an increase in the jail population. In addition to that, because of lengthy sentences, because of denials of parole, we are seeing a ballooning aging population in the state of New York. Something that was maybe 1 in 10 elderly folks before is now closer to 1 in 4. So about 1 in 4 folks in New York State prisons are ages 50 and up, and that is considered elderly in the state's prisons. So there are two reforms that could begin to address this. The first is elder parole, which would simply make available a parole hearing for folks who have reached the age of 55 and have served 15 years in prison. This would, offer a tremendous opportunity for release for so many people who have been languishing behind bars, but who would serve to benefit their communities and would benefit greatly just from being reunited with their families. And I mean, of course, we've talked about the budget deficit numerous times. It would save the state tons and tons of money that could be actually reallocated to address some of the root causes of crime and that fueled people going to these institutions in the first place. I mean, housing and education access and mental health care and healthcare generally, these are areas that should be funded, and we should be removing funding away from this carceral system that is, costing the state upwards of $12 billion a year to maintain. In addition to that, there is the Fair and Timely Parole Act, which would really just change the way in which parole determinations are being made in the state. Unfortunately, so many people are just outright denied parole release because of the crime they committed. They might have committed this crime or have been convicted rather of this crime years and years ago, maybe even decades ago, but they go before a board and they are denied because of that, not because of who they are today, but because of that crime that was committed years and years ago. So that's incredibly important for us to pass this year, both the elder parole bill, Senate Bill 15, and the Fair and Timely bill, and that is Senate Bill 1415. And, it's incredibly important that we pass these reforms. It will save Black lives. It will save so many lives. And it's, something that is long overdue, not a radical reform, simply a reform that just needs to happen to save and protect the lives of New Yorkers.
Thank you, Rodney, and thank you all so much for addressing the realities that New Yorkers are facing. I really want to express the gratitude on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of the gathering and all the viewers. You all brought incredible insight to this panel discussion, and I really, really appreciate you all for joining us. I hope everyone watching at home follows these leaders and stays on top of the incredible work that they're all doing. Make sure to follow their initiatives and keep updated on the links and all the other resources that are being dropped in the chat and in the comment sections. And I now want to introduce my colleague and sister in the movement, the senior regional organizer of the Gathering for Justice, Jasmine Della Fosse, who'll be moderating our next panel.
Thank you so much, Louis, and thank you so much to the incredible panel who came before us. I hope that you continue to follow these leaders and their organizations to stay on top of their great work. Again, as Louis mentioned, my name is Jasmine Della Fosse. I'm the senior regional organizer with the Gathering for Justice based here in California, working across regionally, specifically in San Joaquin County and Ventura. What we heard today is that there's that stakes are high, and there's really this ambitious agenda for 2021. And I want to just get right into it. I have the privilege to introduce to you this next panel of leaders who have committed themselves to really serving on the front lines of injustice happening in our communities and fighting really tirelessly in our communities to keep us safe, and further fights to is continuing to further fight for the liberation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So let's continue this program, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in. I first like to begin by introducing Ms. Layla Aziz, who's the Director of Operations for the Pillars of the Community. Pillars is located in San Diego, California, and operates 3 flagship programs around police accountability, courts accountability, and policy accountability. Really woven into each program is Pillars' work on abolishing gang policies and systemic racisms woven into the gang laws. Thank you, Ms. Layla, for joining us. I'd like to also introduce Efrain Boteo, who is a Fresno native, where he began his advocacy organizing efforts to dismantle the criminalization of Southeast Fresno's youth. He's passionate about creating safe spaces for marginalized youth and ending criminalizations for young BIPOC young people. He began his journey at Fresno Barrios Unidos, where he ran who was a youth participant and then became a facilitator for healing and advocacy groups for young men of color. He participated in the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color work since 2016 and continues to serve and has served as a thought partner with the California Endowment CEO, Dr. Ross, and is now living in Sacramento and continuing to serve as a Justice League California member, continuing his advocacy on well-being of Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth. Thank you for joining us. We have Anthony DiMartino, who is a director of government affairs for the California for Safety and Justice, where he's responsible for strategizing and advocating for safe and just legislative and budget agendas in California Capitol. He began his career as an administrative analyst for the city of Long Beach, working on violence prevention and intervention programs. After working in local government for several years, he was selected as the California State Assembly Fellow and placed in Assemblywoman Shirley Weber's office, where he was then promoted soon after as the legislative director, working on policy issues related to police and criminal justice reform, education reform. Thank you for joining us. I have Tony Gladney, who is a prominent young advocate and activist here in Stockton and San Joaquin Valley of California. He continues to work closely with system-impacted young people as they navigate sort of their way through these unjust systems, through probation, through CPS, through foster care. And he continues to collaborate and work with impacted families following his passion to serve some of the most vulnerable populations that continues to feel his resilience and continuing to pursue serving our young people and communities of color. Thank you for joining us. We also have Abraham Medina, a really, really powerful brother who I'm really excited to have here, who currently serves as the convener and coordinator and process holder for the California Alliance for Youth and Community Justice. Prior to that, he served as the executive director for the National Youth Alliance of Boys and Men of Color. Abraham grew up as an undocumented person of color in the U.S., impacted by working to transform the school to prison to deportation pipeline and the racist youth punishment system as we know it through Afro-Indigenous concepts, approaches, and models of justice. Due to being undocumented, he was a day laborer and roasted peanuts on streets vendors from the age of 13 to 2014. His current focus is being a convener to cultivate collective power for personal and community and systems transformation. He continues to do so much more and continues to build such a powerful movement across the state. We're so glad to have you here today, Abraham. Last but definitely not least, Carmen Perez Jordan, who's dedicated more than 20 plus years of her life advocating for so many of today's most important civil rights issues, including mass incarceration, gender equity, violence prevention, racial healing, and community policing, and serves as our president and CEO of the Gathering for Justice. Carmen has crossed the globe promoting peace through civil and human rights, building alternatives to incarceration and violence, and served as one of the co-chairs for the for the Women's March on Washington, the largest single day demonstration in history, and is really excited to, we're really grateful to have her today on this panel. She'll be joining in with us via audio, so if you don't see her face, she's still here, so keep an ear out for her. But I just want to immediately, just get straight into it. We just heard from our folks in New York, a lot of sort of similarities of what is happening really in New York and what is happening in California. I just want to jump right into it. There's a lot really at stake. And I just want to talk about really what's the state of the people in California. Want to give it to everybody to just sort of give us a quick spill of like, what are we hearing in our communities? We have representation really from across the entire state, from San Diego all the way up to the top of the Bay Area, to the Central Valley, to Sacramento. So we're hoping to hear all of you all's different perspectives of what is happening. But I want to begin to kick off with you, Layla. Thank you for having us, joining us today, but you all do powerful work. So I just want to start it off with you, and if you can.
Thank you. I listened in on the panel in New York, and there were some drastic similarities. And I just remember coming back home, not being very politically involved through my youth, but coming out of the 1990s and the mass incarceration era and seeing everyone I grew up with who's now in prison because of the policies that were passed when we were very young adults or teenagers. So basically what we're looking at are district attorneys who are out of control. The fact that we allowed them and judges and others to put our kids in cages, that our prisons and our DJJs are filled with violence, and that gang laws and gang policies are racist. And the fact that they are still allowed is a 14th Amendment equal protection claim. And the criminal justice system, period, needs to be overhauled, beginning with why we're the only country that elects prosecutors in the globe. So I think that's somewhere where we can all start, we all agree with. And it's some very intelligent people on here. I'm really interested in the work they've been doing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Layla. We appreciate you. We know you have some powerful work, things that we want you to share next. So let's go to Tony, Efrain, and Anthony. And let's just hear real quick from you all. What is the state of the people? What is happening right now?
Yeah, I can go ahead and go. Thank you guys so much for having me be a part of this panel. And I'm just so grateful to be in a space with you all, so many great people and impactful people in this work. I'm coming from the San Joaquin Valley. And I think just really looking at all of the things that everyone knows that we've already been talking about, like with COVID and with the high crime rates and with just the educational system and stuff like that, and then the elections being up. I think one of the biggest and most prominent things that I'm seeing in San Joaquin Valley being affected is our young people in the educational system. Not only in educational system, but also just like their safety as well, because of the heightened violence here in San Joaquin County, specifically in Stockton, the numbers that we're seeing just spiking up. And I think that while we're trying to help our young people, and while there's different policies and different local governments that are trying to do things in different school districts that are trying to make different moves, I think that it also is causing like a confusion and may end up doing more harm than good to our young people having switching up and all the uncertainty and stuff like that. So with our young people in the school system, I think I'm looking at it like a sense of like desperation, like what's going on? What do? We need an immediate call to action. Some things need to change. That's what I'm seeing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Efrain, you want to go ahead and kick it off for us?
Yeah, for sure. Peace and love, everybody. My name is Efrain. Thank you all. Thank you, Jasmine, for the introduction and for the invitation. Thank you to the Gathering for Justice for putting this together. Thank you to all the panelists, and also thank you to everybody who is watching from home right now for this very important conversation. And this question about what is our state right now is a big question, right? Considering the big year that we had in 2020, right? And the main thing that I want to highlight is that there's hope, but there's also barriers. And it's really important that we acknowledge those barriers, because for far too long, we tried to ignore them, and we've seen what that has led to, right? So firstly, I want to acknowledge the fact that we're as mobilized as ever, or I should say as mobilized as I've ever seen in the past 6 years that I've been involved in this work. We're seeing people who maybe weren't involved in 2018, 2019, or even in 2020, who now saw the need to be involved, and now are joining our movements towards the liberation of our people, right? That's an extreme success that we have seen in the past year that I really wanted to highlight. We saw large demonstrations, we saw uprisings, we even saw cities passing a really important reform policies, and we saw the conversation of prison abolition becoming a hot topic, right? As much as we've mobilized ourselves, as much as we mobilize our community, we also see a barrier that we're seeing the opposition rising in numbers as well. We're seeing the opposition being mobilized as well. And I think that's really important to identify right now, because we've seen what that led to, right? We started 2021 with the terrorist attack on the US Capitol by white supremacists, right? And this reminded me of when Malcolm X said in 1963, the chicken's coming home to roost, right? This is hate that has been brewing for a very long time, and we need to acknowledge it in order to address it. At the same time, we saw in California in 2020 that as the youth were outcrying to defund the police department, at the same time, right, this wasn't only in Fresno, I saw this across the state of California, that it was an organized effort by law enforcement, chiefs of police, putting out this narrative saying, oh, well, crime is in the uprise. We need more funding to fight the crime, right? So for me, the way I'm thinking about it is, how insensitive is it for a police department to ask for more money to add to their billion-dollar budgets during a pandemic when poverty has skyrocketed, during a pandemic where folks are struggling to feed their families and folks have lost their jobs, when our resources have continued to be deprived from our communities. And at the same time as well, I really appreciate the conversation that New York was having in terms of COVID infections in the jails as well, right? This racist narrative led by law enforcement has led to the inhumane treatment of our brothers and sisters behind bars. So there was a recent data by the New York Times that was just released a couple of days ago that showed how disproportionately impacted people in prisons in California are being. In my hometown of Fresno, we have the highest COVID infections than any other correctional facility in the United States. That's crazy. And then following to that, 6 other state prisons in California actually made that top 10 list for the most infected, right? So I bring all this up just to say that, yes, we are extremely mobilized, which is definitely needed in these moments, but being mobilized alone does not create the community that we wish to see. Being mobilized alone does not lead to the policy that we wish to see. It is only one part of it, and we must continue to fight in this new decade.
Thank you, Ephraim. You know, it's incredibly important for us to recognize, you know, that, and we heard earlier too from Ronnie and the other panel, sort of the impacts of how COVID and what is happening inside prisons right now, and to hear that Fresno is one of the cities who has the most COVID cases in the county jail compared to any other place. We must pay attention to that, and California must continue to rise up and not lose sight of what is important. Anthony, I want to go to you. You know, as you are working on legislation and continuing to really keep an eye and ear to the ground in Sacramento about what is happening, you know, love to hear from you. You know, what is at stake? What are folks talking about there, and what are you all doing to sort of, you know, be responsive to what is happening? I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Jasmine, and thanks everyone, panelists and the New York panel also tuned in. Awesome work, and so many nexus interconnected, right? It's all over the country, that we're all connected. And I think, you know, touching on Ephraim's point around, you know, mobilizing and coming together, and I really appreciate all the barriers he acknowledged, because we got to know those barriers so that we know what to overcome, right, and what we're facing. And I want to flip it, right? With those barriers, there's opportunities, and the opportunities to work together. And, you know, I've been doing this work for several years now, and then at the state capitol, almost 6 years now. And last year, people don't realize it, but last year was the biggest year in reform I've ever seen. Not enough. I will say that too. Not enough reforms, never enough. You know, we didn't win on some police reforms last year, but I do believe they're going to come back, and we're going to get some wins this year on that. But we saw at the prison level, not enough folks released, but we've 20% decrease. We're talking about closing prisons now, y'all. Like, my organization in 2017 put out a report saying we can close 5 prisons in the next couple of years and save $1.5 billion and reinvest, right, in communities. Well, the state is looking at closing 1 prison this year, 1 prison in the next year, and we're gonna be pushing for 3 or 4 more based on the population projections. So those are some opportunities that we've seen. Now, like I said, it hasn't been enough to really take care of folks that are in prisons. We've lost too many people due to COVID and staff. and that we know that's trickled back into the communities as well. But we're taking some of these wins where we can, right? And what we really need folks to know is we got to make sure we keep pushing on prison closures and then reinvestment, right? So we're talking about right now around $100 million to $150 million for one prison being closed. That's money that we can use to reinvest in our communities, right? My organization talks about shared safety and looking at how we all need to play a role in wrapping our arms around safety, right? And this is for crime survivors. This is for formerly incarcerated folks. So this year, we're really going to be focused on reentry work and removing barriers for folks that have criminal convictions, because we know they're facing such hard challenges right now with COVID. Before COVID, they were facing challenges, and now COVID just made that worse. So those are some things we're going to be focused on, really supporting the work of others around DJJ closure, right? That was another big win last year that we're talking about, closing the Division of Juvenile Justice and bringing kids home. And so we got to see that work through. So there's a whole lot of things, and I could spend a lot of time. And if we have some time to come back, I can touch on some other issues. But really honored to be here, and look for the opportunities with you all as we mobilize together.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, we'll have some time to get back to that. You bring us into a next segment of the conversation that we also want to get into, who Abraham will touch a lot more. But as we begin to close, the governor began to announce to close prisons across the state, we also recognize that there was a call to close youth prisons across the state as well, through this youth realignment initiative. And, I want to call on Abraham to share with us a little bit about, what is at stake with the youth justice work that is happening with the DJJ realignment, and all the work that you are continuing to do right now. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And, I want to echo the sentiments of, other panelists, and also, share that I'm blessed and humbled to be sharing virtual space with all of you today. So I just want to say that up front. And then, I definitely want to share that it's definitely been a collective journey. I represent the California Alliance of Youth and Community Justice, for Youth and Community Justice. And I'm, my brother in struggle, Israel Villa, we co-convene and coordinate that alliance and hold the process for over 35 organizations in 18 counties. And so part of that, our collective power building efforts have been around, making sure that DJJ closes the right way, and also collectivizing not only our power, but centering the leadership of formerly incarcerated and systems impacted people of color. So we've actively, been able to mobilize across the state and gather input from even youth that are currently incarcerated in DJJ in order to inform this closure. Now, as a collective, we're also building our power and also collectivizing our vision towards abolition. And so what does that mean to us? I mean, it's an acknowledgement that we have never had a youth justice system. What we have is a racist youth punishment system, and we must abolish it and dismantle it. And so part of that is also building the alternatives in our community. And so to us, it's also making sure that when we talk about that, we say it's a racist youth punishment system, and it's a fact, and the fact is, like right now, young people across the state, are experiencing very serious systematic racism, and so Black youth are 31 times more likely to be committed to DJJ than white youth, and so when we talk about systemic racism, we're basing that on facts. We're basing that on what we're seeing in our community, what we're experiencing. And so to us, what's at stake is like making sure that it's done the right way, that as somebody mentioned earlier, we just want to make sure that youth are not just being transferred from a state youth prison system to a local juvenile hall, that we're building to make sure that youth are closer to home, but in a way that makes sure that commitments and confinements are reduced, and that young people have trauma-informed, culturally relevant, developmentally appropriate, community-based supports. And so that's at stake right now. Part of it is not just the closure of DJJ, which was been achieved by collectivizing our power, but part of it is also what's at stake is our collective movement towards that vision of putting in place a different approach youth accountability and a real kind of youth justice system.
Very important. Thank you, Abraham. It reminds me of really why I joined the Gathering for Justice. When Mr. B and Carmen and folks created this agenda around how do we end youth and child incarceration. I want to pass it to Carmen, who, came up, working, through these systems and continues to really work to end youth and child incarceration. I know that there's more that she would like to cover. And so Carmen, I'd like to pass it to you just to hear, what is at stake for the people here in California? And what is it that you're hearing and doing right now to combat sort of these issues and areas that we've been talking about tonight?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I kind of feel like this is a role reversal. It's usually me on the other end and asking you these questions because I have to recognize that it's actually you on the ground doing this work. So I want to give it up to you and to everybody who's on this panel continuing to advance justice, and also recognize that I come, as a person who's been mentored by some of the greats who have done this work for a very long time, not only Mr. Harry Belafonte, but Nane Alejandres, who introduced me and took me into the prisons, to the Valley of the Beast, and allowed me to sit with people who were experts in their own right. I often feel that, I could see light in some of the darkest places because of him. He taught me how to do that. And so when I think about the work of California and specifically around, all these different initiatives, it's come because of people like Nane, who have constantly gone into the Valley of the Beast, have constantly brought in, those that were, as we say, least helped but most harmed, brought their voices back into community to ensure that although they could not sit at the table, their voices were in any type of decision or solution that we were implementing. But what I think, and just thinking about, I think it was Efrain who said this, we've come a long way from, 3, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. I've been doing this work for close to 25 years. And, words like white supremacy 4 years ago were a bad word. You would say that word and people were like, oh, I can't believe she said that, right? Abolition, right, was something that, in conversation with Louis, who did a phenomenal job moderating the panel earlier, Louis and I have had many conversations about what does abolition even look like, right? Because when you go into the prisons and when I was, Sean was talking about telling stories, I remember being a young person and we were about to go into Tracy Prison, DBI, to celebrate Black History Month. And I had just gotten out of a conference with Angela Davis, right? And, we were talking about abolishing prisons, and I went into, the prison, and I was so excited, and I was like, we're going to abolish prisons so all of you could get out. And they're like, wait, what are you talking about, Mija? Back up, relax, right? And so again, I think what's important in these conversations around reform or abolition is that not only do we need to center those that are directly impacted, that are on the outs, we also have to engage the folks that are inside, right? We have to make sure that people who are on the inside, who have the wisdom, who have been down for a long time, are also part of these conversations. But I will say there has been a lot of progress. The fact that there was Books Not Bars happening 20 years ago, where there were still like 10 prisons, and now we have 4 youth prisons that we're looking at shutting down, right? About 600 young people that are currently in state facilities. There has been progress. And I think what we can do is that we could continue to talk to one another. We could continue to ensure that that we are not only talking to the left, right? Not talking amongst ourselves. Mr. B often talks about, we have to continue to sing to, preach to the choir so that they could continue to sing, but we have to go into folks that are not politically engaged. It's our tias, it's our cousins, it's making sure that we are, I know under COVID, it's so hard to organize on a physical basis, but we have to get back to door knocking. We have to get back to communities that are directly impacted, because a lot of us have the language and we use these terms that the people that we actually are talking about have no knowledge of, right? I also feel that, it's really not about right or left. It's about right or wrong, right? Like, what are we doing to better our communities? What does economic sustainability look like? What does quality, Zakia talks about education, right? What are we doing to ensure that our kids under COVID are receiving the resources that they need in order to really thrive? Because I know it's hard with having kids in the household and trying to do this Zoom call, and they're like yelling, and I don't know if y'all could hear them, but like at the end of the day, like there's also like mental health that we're all under, right? Even though you may not have ever thought of yourself as having some form of mental health crisis, it feels like all of us are under mental health crisis right now. So what are we doing around that? Homicides are up, domestic violence cases are up. No one is talking about that. How do we ensure that as we're talking about allowing folks to come out of the system, that we are ensuring that we're also protecting those that are in that are victims, right? And I know that a lot of you do that work. And then how do we allow people to feel as though they are living in dignity and being respected, that they have the right to have access to housing, have livable wages. And so I think part of the work that we have and that we have to continue to do is that we have to stop talking about people as though they're not there, right? Because at the end of the day, some of us and some of our family members are still part of that community that we're talking about serving. And I also want to make sure, I think it was a conversation maybe you, Jasmine, and myself and Jay had around, like, huge government bureaucracy are telling us how to live our lives. What we want them to do is give us the resources, right? So that we could govern ourselves, and so that we could determine what is possible in our own communities. But I will say, in regards to the work of the Gathering for Justice, we're going to continue to keep pushing SB 731, the decertification. We're going to continue to advocate and work with victims of police violence and their families. Been working with the Monterosa sisters, Justice for Sean Monterosa, as well as Jakey out of Stockton, who was wrongfully beaten by sheriffs. We also want to make sure that we have an attorney general. I know that there is this appointment that's going to be happening in the next couple of days. So we, as in this crew, everybody who's listening on Facebook, please make sure that you understand how important it is for this nomination. We have to also continue to fight to remove SROs off of campus, replacing them with holistic resources. When I worked in Santa Cruz County as a probation officer doing system accountability from within the system, all the young people that were being referred to the detention center were coming from Watsonville, Pajaro Valley High School. And it was because that school had a police officer, Officer Oda, who was constantly stopping young people and sending them to Felton, to the detention center, where we saw that in Santa Cruz, there was no resource officer there. And because of that, there were not that many referrals to our detention center. So again, I think, the work that you're doing, Jasmine, is so important. I think the work that everybody's doing, but I also will add is that what we need to do better is we need to talk to each other and build stronger coalitions with each other, because of the fact that so many of us are in different spaces. There's so many opportunities to collaborate, but there's times in which we actually don't see each other, we don't hear each other. And so because we can't do that, we have no patience, we end up developing other coalitions, and then we find ourselves running circles, or actually electeds running circles around us, trying to see what coalition is actually fitting best with them, right? So, but I'll pass it back to you, Jasmine. I see my mentor Nane on, so I'm gonna pass the mic.
Yeah, we're gonna actually, thank you, Carmen. We're gonna, pass it to Nane. I'm so excited to have you join us tonight. Carmen, you brought up, when Nane brought you into the prisons, and I know that, in December of, a year ago, Nane invited, me through you to go into Soledad. And I remember when we went into Soledad, I was able to see some of our Samoan brothers and sisters and Pacific Islanders who were in there. And, little did I know that I would actually run into a relative. And it's so incredibly, crazy, not crazy, but like, we go into these spaces and it is our brothers, it is our sisters, our uncles, our family members who are in these places, who are oftentimes turned a blind eye to, who we've thrown away the key to. But we recognize that it's really bigger than that. And what's really at stake is that we must continue to do the work that Carmen just mentioned. Layla, I'm going to go to you next, but I'm going to pass it to Nane first. Before we go there, I wanted you to talk about some of the work you all are doing with your with the Pillars program and the gang work that you all are doing. But Nane, for those who are tuning in, Nane is founded the California Coalition for Barrios Unidos in 1977, where he began as a community-based peace movement in the violent streets of urban California, and later as a nonprofit organization in 1993, where Barrios Unidos established the mission to prevent violence amongst youth within Santa Cruz County by providing them the life-enhancing alternatives. And over the past 5 decades, Nane has been recognized for his inspiring efforts and even was a recipient of numerous awards, including the National Fellowship of Reconciliation of Martin Luther King Jr. Award. And as Carmen mentioned, is a mentor of Carmen. So Mr. Nane, I want to pass it to you. I know we've had several conversations, before about what's the state of the people, but love for you just to share, what's on your heart and what is really happening. And thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay.
You sound great.
Okay. First, let me say thank you to the creator for the challenges that we have. And, I'm literally coming back. I was on the other panel. I was able to listen in, but I'm blessed because, I just went to pick up my compañera of 48 years in the hospital and brought her home. So it's been a day. And I just want to say to you young people, is to take every day and do the best you can every day, because you never know. I've lost so many relatives, and when it's surrounding your area, it really gets you. But I am we're Jenny and I, we've been warriors for 48 years together. So when something happens to someone that you've been hanging out with 48 years, it hits you in the heart, but we're survivors. We've survived many things, war, we survived death, shootings, and cancer, and all kinds of stuff. And we're still here. We're blessed to be amongst all you young people that give people like me inspiration and the future for what's going on. As I heard the other panelists talk about, what's going on in the East Coast and what's going on in the prison systems in New York, and the policies that have worked and those that have not worked, and those that the same shootings that are happening in New York, in our own communities that are happening here. You have to take a step and say something, because sometimes it's hard when you're doing this work and you're doing policy work and you're doing that, And then sometimes we forget about where we come from. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to anybody, but anybody that knows me knows that I've always been pushing for, we got to stop the violence within our own. And if somebody asked me, what's the state of California? I could say that there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that we've changed. There's a lot of things that policy that has been incredible. All the work that you do, Abraham, I'm so proud of him. You know, all the work and everyone in the alliance and everyone that's doing that. But one of the things that really gets me, it's the violence in our barrios, in our ghettos, in our hoods, that has not stopped. And if anything, what I'm doing now is trying to raise a voice as a grandfather and a great grandfather, that the state of California is not bad. It seems like we're going back, and this pandemic has not helped. Has not helped, and we can't go anywhere. People are locked up, and we just recently had a shooting here in Santa Cruz, and 4 young people, 4 are in juvenile hall right now. They're probably going to be facing 25 to life. And with all the work that we've done, something didn't get through to these young folks, and now we have to do the cycle again of what we've done with all these lifers that we've helped come home. And at some point, we have to have individuals that have been gone for many years to come back to the streets. It's great to do policy. It's great to do re-entry, but the little homies, shorties are left alone. And the community did a lot of work to close down the shoes, to not that completely closed, but they removed a lot of people from the shoes, put them on main lines or put them in other places, and a lot of people have come home. But we're not in the streets, and somebody's got to call it. And in California, I'm calling it. The big homies, you got to get to the streets. You cannot be afraid of our own. We cannot, if I'm afraid of speaking the truth about what's going on in our neighborhoods, we already talked about everything that's wrong with the system. We know that. But if we don't address the issue of brown killing brown and black killing black and people of color killing each other and do something about it, then that's our responsibility. That's nobody else's responsibility. That's our responsibility. And as an OG, as a veterano, as an elder, I'm calling on the abuelos, the grandfathers, to come out. And if the younger ones are not going to say it, then the elders have to come out and say, ya basta. And we have had so many killings in all our neighborhoods throughout California. We can no longer stay silent about that. Policy is not going to change that. Policy will help us deal with it, but it's not going to change that madness, that culture has been there for years. And am I hopeful? When I see all your faces, I am hopeful. When I see Jasmine, I speak to her, she gives me that light. When I talk to Carmen and she's doing all those things, it does make me hopeful. And one, I'll leave it with my brother, Danny Glover, that we're meeting on Monday and we're doing a Black Month, Black History Month pop-up, just by talking about trying to get his relative out from Soledad. And we said we're gonna strategize, but at the same time, we're gonna invite the community to celebrate Black History Month on Black and Brown, and that gives me hope. And so I just want to say thank you, everybody, for doing this. We got a lot of work. We cannot hold. And I always tell young people, make sure you prepare yourself to deal with, because what are you going to do 45 years down the road? Jenny and I have been at this for 48 years. My mentor's been at it for a longer time, and he's not giving up yet. So why should I? So hold on there. Things are going to get better, and blessings to all the young people and all the children. Hope all my relations.
Wow, Nana, I have chills right now. I just want to take this moment in. I'm almost really emotional to hear that. You know, I think that this is such a incredible moment for us to even recognize that our people are hurting. You know, it's been a hard year. It's been a hard decade. It's been a hard time for our people. And I think that if there's anything we take away from this is that we have each other, and the way we keep each other safe is by stepping up and into what you just said is a reality check, that get back in the streets, that we gotta get our people, we gotta protect and love one another. And that comes with correction, that comes with care, and that comes with creating this beloved community. And Nana, we love you and we thank you for your wisdom and bringing that to us, because you know, as a young person hearing you say that, and we feel like we struggle with our fights, we understand that there's a responsibility ahead. And, you know, I look to the day to continue to fight for the rest of our lives. And, you know, and I think I want to pass it to Layla, but I just wanted to thank you for really grounding us in that reality and really what is really at the stake, because I know that there's so many people who are feeling what you're feeling. You know, we just buried 7 of our young people in Stockton over the last 2 months, and that's not normal. That's not right. Burying young people and young people dying to gun violence is not normal. And we continue to move like that's normal. And so I just want to, you know, take time for us to recognize what is happening in our community. And Layla, I know you have a lot to add to this. I want to pass it to you. And, you know, I wish we had more time to get into this more, but Layla, I want you to add your piece for sure. And then we'll wrap up with sort of, you know, what do we got to continue to do to keep us safe? That would be our last question for the entire panel. If we can keep it, you know, short, but Layla, if you can just add your part with the work you're doing, and then in addition, adding to we keep us safe. Anthony, I know you got to go, so if you just want to say one word or two, if you want, we could pass it to you real quick if that works before we go to Layla.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thank you, Nana. Thank you, everyone. You know, I agree, and you know, I'm a corny kind of guy, and I believe love changes the world. And I think, you know, having love out in the streets, I think that's what it's about, the connections. And I know it's really hard with COVID right now, like Carmen was mentioning. And so, you know, I think that's what we try to do, is lead through policy with love and connections with folks. And I hope we can continue to do that on the ground, you know, implementation, who we elect, who we connect with, how we think about the problems. So appreciate you all. Sorry, I have to hop off. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for all your work, and thank you. All right, Layla, we're going to pass it to you.
Oh, no, Anthony saved me. I have a dog who's acting up. One of the things that, sorry about that. Carmen was talking about the chaos in the household. I have a 12-year-old. I'm yelling and screaming, get the dog. And it's just not working. But one of the things that I will say is that we don't implement anything in our community without our elders. There's not a step that we make, a policy, a regulation, without our elders who hold us accountable. That's a nice bill, but how are you going to stop us from killing each other? And those are the important questions and demands and accountability that we ask of ourselves. We work with gang members, Bloods, Crips, Logan Heights, young people involved in cartels. And we say that the policies and the regulations are racist. And we're also saying that when you give a young man a felony for a misdemeanor and send him to prison, you have just committed abuse, trauma, and have made a gang member. A lot of us, I started my organizing through working with people directly in the prisons. I got my authority, I got my groundwork, I got my lessons from brothers who were behind enemy lines. Starting with the SHU, then working with the Million for Prisoners Human Rights March. When we marched on Washington, that was a prisoner-led movement. And understanding what they say. And just like the elder said, these guys in here have curriculums, blueprints of how we go into our communities, and we bring these young people into our communities to stop the violence. These young people don't build guns. They don't manufacture guns. So what is going on, and there's a lot of different reasons on how we know politically these things, weapons are put here. And crime has become a political sensational thing. And we understand that the government itself, from crack cocaine to law to guns, exacerbates these situations. When we go into Mexico, we get checked for guns because that's where all the guns come from, the United States of America. Let's be honest about these things that are going on. And we say, who's the dangerous people? And so when we look at these different things, and we look at the policies, and we look at how we can assist, and as we change these gang laws that are racist, but what do we do on the ground? We cannot not change gang laws because we have a problem here. We must do both. And one of those things I remember years ago, I was sitting down with elders, like the elder here, and I said, what do we do? This is about 10 years ago when I was very corporate at the time. I had about 10, 15 years under my belt training, and the term was youth offender. I was a specialist. I was an expert. You couldn't tell me anything. And the guy said, free Larry Hoover. I said, what? Free Larry Hoover. And that's what the elder kind of talked about. Violence prevention programs from the same people we put in cages behind enemy lines who have come home, giving them a livable wage, a union, and a line item, because our communities were defunded for 10 years, a decade. They took everything out of our communities and gave them to law enforcement, from surveillance on streetlights to all of this equipment that the police have. And to understand, first of all, the first thing that we do when we sit down and we talk about violence, we live in a violent country. Black and brown people, we're not these savage Neanderthals, well, we're not Neanderthals at all, but we're not these savages who run around killing everybody. This country is violent. We bomb everybody anytime we want to. Turn on the television when our kids watch, listen to the music that is played. I hear conscious music all the time in our community, but if I turn on the radio, I hear about Percocets and gang rapes and all these things. This is purposeful. And this is a war on our kids by these corporate entities. And we need to acknowledge that. But first, it comes to knocking on those doors. It comes to working with that community. It comes to understanding the services that we need. The police are coming in our community, whether you're a gang member or not, because of domestic violence. How do we bring that healing into our community without the police, without these social service structures? How do we bring Big Mama back in the community who they took out through welfare reform laws? You got kids raising themselves, going anywhere they want to gangbang and do anything because you took the elders, the structures out of the family. We need to stop being embarrassed about the way our families function, particularly that we weren't given any reparations to make it any different. We want Big Mama home. We want her in the house. We don't want her forced to go to Bonds or at Walmart being a greeter and all that other stupid stuff they got going on now with these federal grants and putting old people to work. That is insane. And those are the issues that we have. I am sick and tired of people thinking that it is such a big deal to give somebody who's undocumented social services. Why? How are you going to put a kid in the depths of poverty, tell them you're going to watch him starve, and then say, look at them gangbanging? No one is going to sit down and die. No one is going to go by the road and allow you to walk over them. That is against the way humans work, period. And we have to acknowledge those things. And we have to stop looking at all these borders and all this bullshit that we're caught up into and looking at the people in our community and how we all exist within that. Because that's why gangs exist. It's a sense of belonging. And the criminalization, and gangs don't have to be about violence. Violence comes in when there's poverty, when there's turf wars, when there's not an ability to get a job. You see these youngsters, they want clothing companies. They don't want to go to prison. They don't want to kill anyone. And the very few who do, because they're so traumatized and abused, we get to those young people and we work with them. Our kids are not bad. Our kids are not sociopaths. We know these kids. And never, ever give them the reason to criminalize our kids for belonging. Because based on the 1988 STEP Act, their kids could be gang members too, but they're never documented. Hold them accountable simultaneously while we make sure our elders hold us accountable to make these streets safer so they can walk anywhere they need to be at any time. And that's where it starts. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Elder.
Yeah, thank you. I wish we had more time. We're going to have to wrap up. We probably have about, quickly 5 minutes of the last folks to give us 1 minute each around just what do we got to keep doing to keep us safe? Or what is one thing, or if you want to share anything you're doing, any work, how people can follow or get involved. we'll wrap it up with that conversation. And then we'll end with Mr. Nane. Hopefully, if you can just give us some closing words, Mr. Nane, and ground us with an offering. And our brother Abraham will close us as well with giving us a gift of his offering with his instrument and closing in a collective breath. But before we do that, I'll pass it to Tony, and then we'll go to Ephraim. Layla, if you want to say one more thing, and then Nane and Abraham, and Carmen, and we can close with folks. All right, go ahead, Tony and Ephraim. You'll go next.
Thank you. I just want to take it back a little bit. Like it's a lot, and I love it, and in such a good way. Nane, I just want to thank you for sharing. I was hearing your name, as we got got on this call to kind of get prepared for this panel, and if you weren't going to make it. And I didn't have any idea what I was about to be a part of. And it was so impactful to just hear you and to really just feel what you're saying and to feel like seen, I guess, and feel like, oh, okay, it's not just like me. It's not just us. And I think it was beautiful that you went right after Carmen as well, because I think one of the biggest things that I take away from this and how I want to continue to proceed in this work is that we must humanize this work. We work with humans and we work in social services every day. And yes, policy is important and planning and strategy and outcomes are important, but we must humanize this work because this is who we are serving. And I think that also goes back to with our young people. Like Jasmine said, there's been about 7 young people that had died in the past 2 months in Stockton. I think really realizing that this is not normal and spreading that and even when I make those statements publicly, I will get messages of other young people but it is normal. And that just breaks my heart. And to really make this difference, that commonality does not mean normality. It's just a common thing that does not make it any more okay. So again, just going back to how can we continue to humanize this work? How can we continue to still get out there and have contact with people and just talk to people and speak their language? As I said before in the past panel, I'll say this again in closing, that I think it's tough because we'll get to these tables, we'll get to these round tables, we'll get to these coalitions and collaborations and talk about these people that we serve, but never address them or ask them, how can we serve them? How do they see themselves being served, or how can they join the conversation and serve their peers as well? So that's what I offer. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to join this panel. And I am humbled and I'm blown away. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Ephraim?
Yeah, for sure. And the same sentiments too, like just during this whole conversation, I just been like, I've really been geeked up about everything that folks have been sharing. Like I'm a nerd to every one of you guys' work. And it's really a blessing to be part of this conversation. I wish we were in person to continue this conversation afterwards as well, hopefully in the future. One of the people as well that was brought up, I believe, by Carmen, who I'm also a big follower of as well, is Angela Davis. Like her work is extremely important to the moment that we're in right now in terms of creating this new alternative to what public safety, or creating this new alternative of what community safety is going to look like, right? So one of the things that she said is that schools can be seen as the most powerful alternative to jails and prisons when the structures of violence are eliminated. And, just celebrating the win that California had in Oakland about, ending those contracts with the police departments on schools. And really that's a goal that we should be aiming for across all of California, to ensure that cops aren't on the campuses of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. So really that framework is really important as we move forward. Another thing as well is, right, obviously like the organizing to match the mobilizing that I was talking about earlier. I think it's really important also to amplify the organizing efforts happening in historically red areas of California. Places like the Central Valley, places like Orange County, and so on and so forth, because those are going to be the battlegrounds moving forward into this new decade. We got to be the narrators of our own stories and quickly shut down any narratives seeking to attack our community members, Our leaders in the social justice movements were attacked in 2020 very heavily. So we got to make sure that we're protecting these leaders to be able to guide us as we move forward. Something that was brought up by Jumani, I believe, about political courage. We also need policymakers to have that political courage, who are willing to put their political career on the line for our movement as well. And I'll end off with this. So me growing up in a Latino household, we were always taught that family is everything, right? My tío or tía might be telling chismes about each other. I might have a cousin that's totally different from me that I don't really vibe with. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna ride for you because you're my family. That's what I was taught, right? So moving forward, how do we keep ourselves safe? We got to have that same framework as well. We got to stick to those principles, right? So if prison facilities, police departments, school districts, whatever system causes harm to my people, I'm gonna fight back. If there's a false narrative, chisme, whatever you want to call it, I'm gonna fight back. If I don't like you, I don't like your neighborhood, your organization, whatever it may be, I'm willing to put my ego aside and work with you towards the liberation of our people. So that's going to be really important as we move forward. But, once again, like I said, it's a blessing to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Efrain. Carmen, if you have any last words, and then I'll leave it to Abraham and Nana to help close us out. Okay.
Oh my God, I'm like touching my computer and I'm actually on my cell phone. That just goes to show I'm in the middle school of the old school and the new school. Anyways, I just want to remind us, thank you so much, Nana, for always showing up and for paving the way for so many of us. I am grateful to be in this space. And I think it's probably one of the first times and the only times that I've actually been in this space as somebody who's speaking. And so I just want to applaud the moderators. I want to applaud everybody who's spoken. I also want to applaud everybody who's behind the scenes, Danice, Jules, Chris, everybody who in this moment you can't see but has made this happen. But I will say is, let's just remind each other to be kinder to one another. That doesn't take policy change, that takes corazón. And especially because these are hard times. We all have probably lost somebody to COVID, and we're burying people. I know my cousin right now is being buried in this moment right now. But also there's a lane for everybody, right? There's a lane for all of you. But what I realized in this conversation is the fact that, Nane, the reason why I have Nana in my life is because he reminds me that I didn't reinvent shit. Sorry, Nana, I didn't mean to cuss, but I didn't reinvent any of this. They've been doing this work, right? And when we're not connected to elders, we can get caught up in this ego and we can forget who we're doing this for. Yes, we need policy change, but we also need to organize. We need, as we center young people in these conversations, let's not forget those that have actually done this work for a very, very long time. And that's the reason why the Gathering for Justice is an intergenerational, intercultural social justice movement, right? Rooted in nonviolence, because it was the elders that came together first and brought us in, us young people. And it is our generation to pass the baton to even the younger generation. So as you're sitting here, Efrain, Tony, Abraham, y'all make sure that you got young people that you're raising up too underneath you, right? But I wanted to say something about what policy we need to change. Yes, we got to make sure that we're that people who are watching on Facebook go and check out what SB 731 is. Reach out to folks, see how you could, if your organization, sign on as a collaborator, sponsor, go to @Justice4Sean, go to @NY Justice League, @Gather4Justice on Instagram. Make sure that y'all reach out and tweet to Governor Newsom. Make sure that he appoints an attorney general that is reflective of the state of California. But at the end of the day, I just want to thank you all and remember that our biggest asset is everybody who's in this virtual town hall right now and the people that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. You know, as we be Layla, sorry, you can if you want to say one quick, okay. And then so before I pass it to Abraham and Nana, let me just wrap us up in something that I want to end. But if Nana can share some words of wisdom to all of us, and anything else you want to share, then we'll end it with Abraham and we'll close out the evening. But before I do that, again, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us tonight for the We Keep Us Safe Town Hall. I'd like to thank each and every one of the panelists who joined us, Mr. Nana, Zakia, Layla, Murad, Efrain, Anthony, Rodney, Sean, Abraham, Stevie, Tony, Pamela, Jamani, as well as my colleagues, Louis and Carmen. Please continue to follow these incredible leaders who remain on the front lines of this work. If you like what you heard, again, follow us at NY Justice League and at the Gather for Justice on Twitter and Instagram. We're also excited to announce that coming up on February 18th, at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have our next Radical Reads conversations with our friend Mark Lamont Hill, who will be discussing his 2 new books, We Still Here and Except for Palestine. To keep up to date with our work, again, you can continue to support our work by following us on our page, as well as thegatheringforjustice.org. I'm going to pass it to Nana and then Abraham to share, and then we'll close off our evening. But once again, thank you all so much. It's been an incredible honor to be in space and to take all of this medicine and blessings that you all have shared with us today.
Blessings again. You know, I was thinking about how do we sustain ourselves and spiritually, culturally, having that at the forefront, you know, to take care of ourselves, where we come from. But also in this time, we also have to think about, and you young people need to think about financially how you keep yourself afloat. Don't wait till you're 71 years old to start making your plans, you know. And I come from a different generation that you didn't ask anything, you just did it. And I see you young people doing it also that way, but that you make sure that economically you take care of yourself, your familia. Because at the end, you know, Jenny and I are here, and whatever we leave our familia is what we've been able to put together. And no matter how much work we did or we didn't do, that's what it is. It's going to be to the familias. Make sure you take care of those babies and stuff and yourself. You know, we're blessed in Santa Cruz, and I want to give a shout out and a big thanks to our staff, because without our staff, you know, I wouldn't be here. You know, and they gave me the honor to be able to sit in places like this. All the volunteers that come every Friday and Saturday to feed the people. We feed over 500 people every weekend. To all the formerly incarcerated that are been working out at the retreat center, to make sure that we have a healing center. I think the Walter Guzman Retreat Center, and Carmen coined it the Highlander of the West. So there is a community, there's a center here, there's land that you can come to, and we offer it to everybody, and we offer it to everyone in this group, is bring your young people. People, they love when they get out of the city to come to and hug a redwood tree, you know, pick up a shovel, you know, go down the trails, go to the beach, you know, and nothing, it won't cost you anything, but just a little bit of work, you know, that you can help out, that's all. This work has given us a lot. We're land-based people without no land. If you have the opportunity to buy the building you're at, buy some land, buy it, you know, because we need a foundation to work with. Gentrification is put us out of the cities. People have to move from where they were raised. So we have to get back into that, you know. I think we can learn a lot from the Black farmers in the South of what they've done. So spiritually, that's what I would say. Keep that spirituality, you know, listen to the grandfathers, grandmothers. And, you know, I think our young people are looking for that. So thank you.
Hope.
Oh, thank you. Abraham?
Just a blessing and an honor to be part of this dialogue, collective dialogue. And I just want to say, I'm thankful for this conversation. I know that, I'm thankful for Elder Nane, that keeps me rooted, for my children to keep me rooted, for my partner that keeps me rooted. And it's true, like, we might have be closing down DJJ and state youth prisons. And Nane called me and he's just like, what kind of energy are we putting into addressing the violence within each other, And so I remember, just growing up, being born into violence, and all I knew was violence and punishment. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s when I started to learn about restorative justice and transformative justice and healing justice. Somebody at one time came up to me and gifted me a flute. Because I was like, I struggled with breathing. And so part of it has been this journey to like learning from elders like Nane in these healing spaces. And like exploring what the transformative journey could be collectively, intergenerationally, as a society. And so part of it, I was able to connect with an elder, with the maestro there, Maestro Marquez. And he shared that, he shared a little bit more because, I'm learning too, but he shared that, that this is a medicine, a gift from the bird nation, from the trees, from Mother Earth. And we combine it with the sacredness of our breath and with the air, and then it could help us heal and help us recenter that and remember our breath. And it can, be a way of healing as a practice too. So I just want to ask permission, and with your permission, to share this with y'all as we close out and honor everybody that's on the front lines, the youngsters like Sergio going into the hoods in Fresno, Young Women's Freedom Center, right, providing housing during the pandemic for girls and women of color, gender non-conforming folks, for fathers and families, out there making sure that elders are okay, for Nane and the team in Santa Cruz, Barrios Unidos, for all the food and all the efforts and all the healing spaces that they provide for everyone in the community. So to all those on the front lines and to all those right now behind enemy lines, may we begin these prayers be sent and be heard, and may we collectively continue to heal. Ho Ashe, Torah relations.
Oh, shit. Thank you all so much. Thank you for that. And thank you, Nana, for giving us medicine as well. And for Abraham, to Tony, to Ephraim, to Layla, to Carmen, and to everybody who was here. We needed this, and may you all continue to walk and continue to find strength in one another. I look forward to continuing this good work with you all, and much blessings and peace to you all. Thank you all for joining us tonight.